The Galactic Council's centuries-long grip on power shattered the moment Captain Zachary Hall spoke. The human delegation had come in peace, but their secret weapon against the Council's mind control was deadlier than 1,000 plasma cannons. Hall and his crew, the first humans to reach the Council's grand space station, stepped into the cavernous chamber ringed with curious alien eyes. Wagner Ambassador Draco narrowed his reptilian gaze and focused his mind, sending the subliminal control frequencies used for eons to dominate the Council races. To Draco's horror, he sensed nothing from the humans' minds, as if their brains were black boxes. "Brothers and sisters of the galaxy," Hall began in a booming voice, arms spread in greeting. "We humans come as friends to share knowledge and build bridges between the stars." A stunned silence fell, then murmurs erupted. Some welcomed this blow against Wagner dominance. Others saw the humans as a dire threat to their power. In an emergency meeting, Draco argued to isolate and interrogate the humans. The other ambassadors nodded, fear and greed warring in their eyes as they mentally shifted allegiances and schemes. Hall worked the reception, shaking appendages and sampling alien delicacies, a furtive touch at his elbow. "Captain Hall, I'm Corv. Walk with me." The avian counselor steered him to a deserted viewport. "You're in grave danger," Corv whispered. "The Wagner have controlled the Council for generations using mind subversion, but you humans are immune." His wings fluttered with urgency. "They'll do anything to uncover your secret. Trust no one. I'll contact you soon." Corv slipped away, leaving Hall gripping the viewport rail, the stars blurring before his eyes. Humanity's dream of peaceful exploration died, replaced by the cold equations of survival in a hostile galaxy. As the welcome reception continued, Captain Hall found himself approached by Counselor Zafir, a striking Chiralian with iridescent scales and piercing amber eyes. Zafir's mellifluous voice carried a note of admiration as he spoke of humanity's rapid rise to interstellar power. "Captain Hall, your species' achievements are nothing short of remarkable," Zafir said, his forked tongue flickering. "I would be honored to give you and your senior officers a private tour of our most advanced research facilities. The wonders we could show you." Hall's curiosity piqued at the offer. Access to the Council's cutting-edge technology could provide invaluable insights for Earth's scientific community. After a moment's consideration, he accepted with a nod. Unbeknownst to the humans, their immunity to mind control had sent shockwaves through the Council's power structure. In shadowed alcoves and sealed chambers, frantic delegates engaged in clandestine meetings, forging tenuous alliances and plotting countermeasures. The Wagner leadership moved swiftly to shore up their dominion. Ambassador Draco sought out Counselor Vortex of the Krenim Empire, a ruthless strategist known for his unscrupulous tactics. Together, they hatched a plan to abduct the humans and unravel the secret behind their mental resistance. Hall and his team followed Zafir through the station's labyrinthine corridors, marveling at the technological wonders on display. Sleek spacecraft with star-spanning warp drives sat alongside chambers buzzing with mind-boggling nanorobotics. Yet as they delved deeper, discrepancies began to emerge. Certain questions were met with evasive answers, and entire sections were conspicuously off-limits. Suddenly, an ear-splitting alarm rent the air. Zafir's demeanor shifted from genial host to tense guardian as he hurried the group towards an exit, citing a security breach. In the ensuing confusion, Hall found himself separated from his crew, his calls lost in the clamor of evacuation. Stumbling through an unmarked door, Hall froze. The hidden chamber before him was a grotesque menagerie of horrors: dissected alien corpses, rows of mind control devices, and tanks filled with pulsating, malformed creatures. The sickening realization crashed over him like a frigid wave. The Council's benevolent facade was a lie, masking a regime built on unspeakable cruelty and domination. Heart-pounding, Hall raced back to his ship, evading detection by the barest of margins. Commander Reeves greeted him with grim news. Their communications were compromised, their movements tracked. The Wagner were tightening the noose. In a desperate gamble, Hall ordered the crew to prep for emergency departure, while he reached out to Corv on a secure channel. The avian counselor's shock was palpable as Hall relayed his grim discoveries. "You must flee now," Korv urged, his voice trembling. I am sending coordinates to a resistance safe house. We will do what we can to aid your escape. Mere moments after the transmission ended, proximity alerts flared to life. The Council's forces were closing in, intent on ensnaring their prey. The human ship leapt into action, Captain Hall barking commands as his crew raced to battle stations. Pulse lasers flashed and energy shields thrummed, the vessel weaving through a gauntlet of enemy fire. With a teeth-rattling jolt, they punched into FTL, leaving the Council ships grasping at fading contrails. They emerged in a starless void, a lone asteroid base, the only break in the inky expanse. Korv and a motley assortment of aliens awaited them, each bearing the scars of resistance against the Council's tyranny. As Hall and his crew were ushered into the base, the grim reality began to coalesce. The Council's crimes spanned centuries. Entire civilizations ground beneath the boot heel of their telepathic control. The suffering and inequality were staggering in scope. Captain Hall, you must understand, Korv said solemnly. Your arrival has set in motion a chain of events long in the making. The Resistance has dreamt of this day, a crack in the Council's armor, a chance to strike a blow for freedom. Hall squared his shoulders, the weight of billions pressing upon him. Humanity's mission of peaceful exploration had ended. Now they were fugitives, thrust into the heart of a war they never sought. But as he looked to his crew, to the alien faces etched with pain and purpose, he knew there was only one course. They would fight. They would find a way to expose the Council's vile machinations and rally the oppressed. For in the face of such injustice, inaction was complicity. The path ahead was shrouded in peril, the odds stacked high against them. But in that moment, Captain Hall felt something kindle in his chest, a flicker of hope, an ember of defiance. The Resistance had gained a powerful ally, and the battle for the soul of the galaxy had only just begun. Captain Hall's eyes swept across the faces gathered around the asteroid base's dimly lit command center. Aliens of every shape and hue, united by a shared purpose, to overthrow the Council's iron grip on the galaxy. A towering figure stepped forward, scales shimmering in the low light. I am Vela of the Zorn Empire, she said, her voice a low rumble. Your actions have given us hope, Captain Hall. Hall nodded, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down on him. We came seeking peace, but it seems we've stumbled into a war. Korv's feathers rustled as he spoke. A war long in the making, Captain. Your immunity to the Council's mind control could be the key to ending their reign of terror. The avian resistance leader outlined their plan, a daring infiltration of the Council's central mind control hub. Hall listened intently, his mind racing through the implications. It was a suicide mission by any measure, but the potential payoff? We're in, Hall said, his crew nodding in agreement. Whatever it takes to stop the Council. The next days blurred into a whirlwind of activity. Hall and his team trained alongside the Resistance fighters, learning to move and fight in the cramped confines of a space station. Vela proved to be a formidable instructor, her fluid grace belying lethal precision. During a rare moment of respite, Hall found Vela gazing out a viewport, her reflection ghostly against the star-speckled void. Second thoughts? He asked, moving to stand beside her. Vela's amber eyes met his. No, but the cost of failure. Hall's hand found hers, scaled fingers intertwining with his own. Then we won't fail. The moment shattered as alarms blared throughout the base. Korv burst into the room, his wings flared in agitation. The Council's found us! We need to move! Now! In a flurry of activity, the infiltration team donned their disguises. Hall felt exposed in the ornate robes of a Council delegate, but Vela's steady presence at his side bolstered his tenacity. Their stolen shuttle glided towards the looming bulk of the mind control station. Hall's pulse quickened as they transmitted their forged credentials. Seconds stretched into eternity before the docking bay doors yawned open. Remember, Korv whispered as they disembarked, act like you belong. Hall strode forward, chin held high, mimicking the haughty demeanor he'd observed in the Council chamber. They passed through checkpoints, Hall's immunity shielding them from telepathic scrutiny. As they neared the central control room, a shrill alarm pierced the air. "We've been made!" Vela hissed, drawing her concealed weapon. The corridor erupted into chaos. Energy bolts sizzled past Hall's head as he dove for cover. Vela moved like liquid lightning, her blaster finding targets with unerring accuracy. They fought their way forward, inch by blood-soaked inch. Hall's world narrowed to the pounding of his heart and the acrid smell of ozone. Finally, they reached the sealed doors of the control room. "Cover me!" Hall shouted, his fingers flying over the access panel. The doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Inside, banks of pulsing machinery filled the cavernous space. At the center stood a raised platform, crowned by a gleaming interface. "Go!" Vela ordered, taking up a defensive position. "I'll hold them off." Hall sprinted for the platform, blaster fire scorching the air around him. He reached the interface, hands hovering over the alien controls. This was it, the culmination of their desperate gamble. Taking a deep breath, Hall plunged his hands into the shimmering field of energy surrounding the interface. Information flooded his mind, a torrent of alien data threatening to overwhelm him. He pushed back, using his innate immunity to navigate the system's defenses. With a final Herculean effort, Hall found what he was looking for. He activated the kill switch, feeling the station shudder around him as systems began to fail. "It's done," he called to Vela, staggering away from the platform. "Let's get out of here." They fought their way back to their shuttle, the station descending into anarchy around them. As they blasted away from the doomed structure, Hall allowed himself a moment of hope. The Council's grip on the galaxy was broken, but the real work was just beginning. Hall's ears rang as the shuttle roared away from the collapsing mind control station. Vela's scaled hand gripped his shoulder, steadying him as they punched through the debris field. "We did it," he breathed, the enormity of their actions barely registering. Vela's amber eyes glowed with fierce triumph. "This is only the beginning, Captain." How right she was. As news of their victory spread across subspace channels, the galaxy erupted. Centuries of pent-up resentment and oppression ignited into a firestorm of rebellion. Hall found himself thrust onto a galactic stage. His face beamed across 1,000 worlds as a symbol of defiance. The resistance, once scattered and disorganized, coalesced around the humans and their unlikely band of allies. In the cavernous war room of their new base, Hall surveyed the assembled leaders. Vela stood tall, her warrior's stance a stark contrast to Corv's nervous energy. The avian counselor had proven himself a brilliant tactician, his insights invaluable as they planned their next moves. "The Council is wounded but not defeated," Corv said, his wings twitching. "They're consolidating their forces around Centralis." Holographic displays flickered to life, showing the buildup of the Council armada. At its heart loomed the imposing bulk of Centralis, a world-spanning metropolis filled with defenses. "We need to strike now," Vela growled, her claws tapping an impatient rhythm on the war table. "Before they can regroup." Hall nodded, studying the swirling patterns of fleet movements. A plan began to form in his mind, audacious and desperate in equal measure. "We'll hit them where it hurts," he said, zooming in on Centralis. "A surgical strike at the heart of their power. If we can broadcast the truth to every corner of the galaxy." The room erupted in a cacophony of voices, arguing logistics and practicalities. Hall let the debate wash over him, his eyes locked on the rotating image of Centralis. They would have one shot at this, one chance to topple an empire. Days blurred into weeks as they prepared. Diversionary attacks were launched across a dozen systems, drawing Council forces away from their prize. Hall drilled with his strike team, a motley assortment of species united by a common purpose. Finally, the moment arrived. Hall stood on the bridge of their flagship, the vast armada of the Revolution spread out before him. Vela took her place at his side, her presence a steadying anchor. "All ships, this is Captain Hall," he said, his voice carrying to every vessel in the fleet. "You know what's at stake. For too long, the Council has stolen our very thoughts. Today, we take back our minds. Today, we take back our future." A roar of affirmation filled the comms as the fleet surged forward. The void erupted in a dazzling light show as energy weapons lanced between ships. Hall's strike team raced for the surface, weaving through the chaos of battle. Their shuttle bucked and shuddered as it plunged through Centralis's atmosphere. Hall gritted his teeth, feeling the crushing G-forces as they dove towards their target. With a bone-jarring impact, they touched down in the sprawling plaza before the council chambers. "Move!" Hall shouted, leading his team into the fray. They fought their way through waves of defenders, each step bringing them closer to their goal. Hall's muscles burned, his lungs heaving as he pushed himself to the limit. Finally, they breached the inner sanctum. The council leaders cowered before them, stripped of their aura of invincibility. Hall wasted no time. He strode to the central podium, keying in the broadcast codes their inside agent had provided. Taking a deep breath, Hall faced the galaxy. "Citizens of the stars," he began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "For generations, you have lived under the heel of the Council's oppression. They have stolen your thoughts, your very identities. But no more." As Hall spoke, detailing the Council's crimes and declaring a new era of freedom, he felt the weight of billions of eyes upon him. In that moment, he knew their victory was assured. The Council's reign of terror was over. But as the sounds of celebration echoed through the chamber, Hall's eyes met Vela's. They both knew the real work was just beginning. Toppling a regime was one thing. Building a new, just society from its ashes would be the true test of their purpose. The echoes of celebration faded as quickly as they had begun. Captain Hall stood at the viewport of the newly christened Galactic Assembly Chamber, watching the glittering expanse of Centralis sprawl beneath him. The victory over the Council felt hollow now, a brief moment of triumph overshadowed by the monumental task ahead. "Captain, the representatives are assembled," Corv's voice chirped from behind him. The avian's feathers were ruffled, a sign of the stress he'd been under since taking on the role of assembly speaker. Hall nodded, straightening his uniform. "Let's not keep them waiting." The chamber buzzed with a cacophony of languages as Hall took his place at the podium. Faces both familiar and alien turned towards him, expectation heavy in the air. "Members of the Assembly," Hall began, his voice carrying across the room. "We've toppled a regime, but now comes the real challenge, building something better in its place." As he outlined the formation of the interim government, Hall could see the cracks forming. Delegates from the core world shifted uneasily, while the outer rim representatives leaned forward, hungry for change. The session devolved into chaos within hours. Shouts of "tyrant" and "wealth hoarder" echoed through the chamber as factions clashed over resource allocation and representation. Hall's comm unit buzzed. Vela's face appeared, her scales flushed with exertion. "Captain, we've cornered Draco in the Rigel system, requesting permission to engage." "Granted," Hall replied, his eyes never leaving the brewing storm before him. "Be careful out there." Days blurred together as Hall juggled crises. Reports flooded in of Wagner attacks on the outer colonies. General Rolas, a grizzled veteran of a dozen rebellions, coordinated the counteroffensive from a makeshift war room. "We're spread too thin," Rolas growled, his holographic form flickering. "If we don't get reinforcements soon, we'll lose the Andromeda sector." Hall rubbed his temples, fatigue etching lines in his face. "I'll see what I can do, General. But the Assembly—" A commotion outside cut him off. The doors burst open, revealing a slight figure flanked by a phalanx of supporters. Her eyes blazed with righteous fury. "Captain Hall," she spat, her voice carrying the weight of countless injustices. "I am Malra, and I speak for the forgotten." Hall listened as Malra laid out her demands. Her words struck a chord, resonating with his own sense of justice. But the Assembly elites bristled, their grip on power threatened. In the following days, Centralis erupted. Hall watched from the Assembly Tower as riots engulfed the lower levels. Malra's voice boomed from countless screens, a rallying cry for the oppressed. "We cannot allow this to continue," Corv said, his wings twitching nervously. "The old guard is pushing for a crackdown." Hall's teeth clenched. He'd seen where that path led. With a deep breath, he made his decision. "Call an emergency session," he ordered, "and get me a secure line to Malra." The assembly chamber crackled with tension as Hall took the podium. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. "We stand at a crossroads," he began, his voice steady. We can cling to the old ways and watch our hard-won freedom crumble, or we can embrace change. Gasps and angry mutters filled the room as Hall outlined his plan. A new constitution, enshrining rights for all sentient beings, automated resource allocation to address centuries of inequality. "This is madness," a Crenum delegate shouted. "You'll destroy everything we've built." "No," Hall countered. "We'll build something better." The vote was close, but with Malra's faction lending their support, the reforms passed. As Hall left the chamber, a searing pain lanced through his shoulder. He stumbled, blood seeping through his uniform. "Assassin!" Corv screeched, his wings flaring protectively. Security swarmed, but the damage was done. As medics rushed him to the infirmary, Hall's last thought before losing consciousness was of the long road ahead. He awoke to find Vela at his bedside, her scales dulled with exhaustion. "Welcome back, Captain," she said, a rare smile gracing her features. "You've caused quite the stir." Hall grimaced as he sat up. "Status report?" "Ralthak escaped during the chaos," Vela replied, her expression darkening. "He's gathering forces in the Outer Rim, and the situation on Tyr is deteriorating." Hall nodded, his mind already racing. "We need to solidify our position, set up a galaxy-wide referendum on the new constitution. Let the people decide." Vela's eyes widened. "That's a big gamble, Captain." "It's the only way," Hall said, his voice firm. "We didn't come this far to become the very thing we fought against." As news of the referendum spread, the galaxy held its breath. Hall knew that everything they'd fought for hung in the balance. But as he looked out at the stars, he felt a flicker of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in centuries, the people would have a real choice in shaping their future. The referendum results flashed across the holoscreens, bathing the assembly chamber in an eerie blue glow. Hall's heart pounded as he scanned the numbers. 51.3% in favor. A slim majority, but enough. "It's done," he breathed, turning to face the assembled delegates. "The people have spoken." The chamber erupted. Cheers from Malra's supporters clashed with howls of outrage from the opposition. A Crenum delegate, his scales flushed dark with anger, stormed towards the podium. "This is tyranny," he snarled, jabbing a clawed finger at Hall. "You've doomed us all, human." Security moved to intercept, but Hall waved them off. "Delegate Kraz, I understand your frustration, but this is the will of the galaxy. We must nothing," Kraz spat. "The Crenum Patriot League rejects this farce. We will not be bound by your so-called reforms." With that, he stormed out, a dozen other delegates in his wake. Hall's stomach twisted as he watched them go. He'd known this wouldn't be easy, but the reality of the situation was setting in. The galaxy was fracturing before his eyes. Corv fluttered to his side, feathers ruffled. "Captain, we're receiving reports of unrest on multiple worlds. The Cranium are already mobilizing their fleet." Hall nodded grimly. "Alert Vela, tell her to—" His comm unit chirped, cutting him off. Vela's face appeared, her scales dulled with fatigue. "Captain, we have a situation on Tyr. Crenum hardliners have seized control of the capital. They're calling for secession." "Understood. Do what you need to contain the situation, but minimize casualties. We can't afford to—" The feed cut out abruptly, replaced by static. Hall's blood ran cold. "Sir," a young aide rushed up, datapad in hand. "We're getting reports of an orbital bombardment on Tyr. It's our own ships, sir." Hall's world tilted. "What? Who authorized this?" The answer came moments later as General Rollis's grizzled face filled the main screen. "This is General Rollis to all assembly forces. The insurrection on Tyr has been neutralized. I am declaring martial law in all disputed sectors until order can be restored." "Rollis, stand down immediately," Hall barked, but the feed had already cut out. The next hours passed in a blur of crisis management and damage control. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Riots on core worlds, colonies declaring independence, Ralthak's forces gaining ground in the Outer Rim. Hall stood at the viewport, watching the glittering expanse of Centralis. The enormity of what he'd set in motion crashed over him. A hand on his shoulder startled him from his reverie. They're waiting for you, Malra said softly. Her eyes, once blazing with revolutionary fire, now held a mix of perseverance and concern. Hall nodded, squaring his shoulders. He'd made his choice. Now he had to see it through. The cabinet meeting was tense, filled with raised voices and accusations. Hall listened, letting the arguments wash over him. When silence finally fell, he spoke. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," he said, his voice steady. "But we cannot falter now. Corv, I need you to reach out to our allies in the Rim worlds. Shore up support where we can. Malra, your people have the trust of the common folk. We'll need that in the days ahead." One by one, he assigned tasks, reshaping his government for the struggles to come. As the meeting adjourned, a priority alert flashed across his datapad. His blood ran cold as he read the message. "Sir?" Corv asked, noticing his expression. Hall's voice was grim as he relayed the news. "There's been an attack on New Eden, some kind of bioweapon. Thousands dead, more infected." The room fell silent, the weight of this new tragedy settling over them. Hall's fists clenched at his sides. "Find him," he growled. "I don't care what it takes. Find Draco and bring him to justice." As the others filed out, Malra lingered. "What now, Captain?" Hall's eyes hardened as he stared out at the stars. "Now? We fight?" Hall's eyes hardened as he stared out at the stars. "Now? We fight." The words had barely left his lips when alarms blared throughout the station. Corv's feathers bristled as he checked the incoming data stream. "Captain, multiple hyperspace signatures detected. It's Ralthak's fleet." Hall sprinted to the command center, his mind racing. How had they slipped past their early warning systems? As he burst through the doors, the tactical display flickered to life, revealing a swarm of enemy vessels converging on Tyr. "All hands to battle stations," Hall barked. "Corv, initiate emergency evacuation protocols. Malra, get our people to the shelters." The next hours passed in a blur of chaos and desperate resistance. Hall coordinated what defenses they had, but it was clear they were outmatched. Ralthak's ships tore through their outer perimeter, methodically dismantling orbital platforms and defense grids. As the rebel armada closed in on the central government complex, Hall made the call he'd hoped to avoid. "This is Captain Hall to all assembly personnel. Enact Protocol Omega. I repeat, Protocol Omega is in effect." Alarms shifted pitch as the station's self-destruct sequence engaged. Hall turned to Corv, his expression grim. "Get to the evacuation shuttles. I'll hold them off as long as I can." Corv's beak clacked in protest. "But sir—" "That's an order, Speaker. The assembly must survive." As Corv reluctantly departed, Hall squared his shoulders and faced the oncoming storm. He'd barely made it to the auxiliary control room when the first breaching pods struck the station's hull. Rebel troops poured in, led by a towering Krenum in gleaming battle armor. Hall's blood ran cold as he recognized the distinctive crest. "Kraz!" he spat, raising his sidearm. The Krenum's scales rippled with contempt. "Your revolution dies here, human!" Blaster fire erupted, filling the air with ozone and screams. Hall dove for cover, returning fire as he tried to buy time for the evacuation. A stray bolt caught him in the side, and he stumbled, vision blurring. Through the haze of pain, he saw Malra appear at the far end of the corridor, her eyes wide with shock. "Go!" Hall shouted, gesturing frantically. "Get out of here!" Malra hesitated for a moment, torn between loyalty and survival. Then she nodded, disappearing into the smoke. As Kraz's forces closed in, Hall activated his emergency beacon. The station shuddered, klaxons blaring the final countdown. He allowed himself a grim smile. Even in defeat, he'd deny Ralthak his prize. The world erupted in fire and twisted metal. When Hall regained consciousness, he found himself in an unfamiliar medbay, surrounded by the hum of antiquated equipment. "Easy there, Captain," a gruff voice said. "You took quite a beating." Hall's vision swam into focus, revealing a scarred face framed by salt and pepper hair. The man's calloused hands efficiently checked various readouts. "Where am I?" Hall rasped, his throat raw. "Who are you?" "Name's Enrique Garcia," the man replied, his accent thick with the drawl of the outer colonies. "As for where, Let's just say you're a long way from Centralis. Before Hall could press for details, the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Corv entered, his plumage ruffled but intact. "Captain, thank the stars you're awake. We feared—" "Report, Speaker," Hall interrupted, struggling to sit up. "What's our situation?" Corv's crest drooped. "Dire, I'm afraid. Ralthak's forces have seized control of Tyr and several key systems. Malra's followers are waging guerrilla campaigns on occupied worlds, but—" "But what?" Hall pressed. Garcia's expression darkened. "But your boy Rolus has gone full warmonger. He's leading a scorched earth campaign against Draco's Wagnir, and to hell with civilian casualties." Hall's fist clenched. This was exactly what he'd fought to prevent. The spiral into tyranny and brutality. He swung his legs off the bed, ignoring the protests of his battered body. "We need to re-establish contact with our allies," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Rally what forces we have left and—" Garcia's hand on his shoulder stopped him cold. The older man's eyes were hard, devoid of any warmth. "Not so fast, Captain," Garcia growled. "You want my help? You're gonna have to earn it. I've seen what happens when aliens get too much power. Why should I trust you or your revolution?" Hall met Garcia's gaze, recognizing the weight of history and prejudice behind those words. He knew that everything hinged on what he said next. "Because," Hall began, choosing his words carefully, "the alternative is far worse." "Because," Hall began, choosing his words carefully, "the alternative is far worse. Ralthak and his allies seek to plunge the galaxy into chaos. We need to stand united against that threat." Garcia's eyes narrowed, searching Hall's face for any sign of deception. After a long moment, he grunted and released his grip on Hall's shoulder. "Fine, but I'm watching you, Captain. One wrong move, and you're on your own." Before Hall could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Corv's feathers bristled as he checked a nearby console. "Multiple incoming transmissions," he reported. It's Malra, sir. She's denouncing us on every channel." Hall's lips pursed as he watched the feeds. Malra, her eyes blazing with righteous fury, stood before a sea of protesters on Altheris. "The so-called assembly has betrayed us," she roared. "While our people starve, Hall and his lackeys wage war across the stars. No more. We will not be silent." As her words faded, reports flooded in of sabotage supply lines and violent clashes with Rolus's peacekeepers. Hall's mind raced, trying to process this new betrayal. "We need to respond," Corv urged. "If we don't counter her narrative—" "Later," Hall cut him off. "Right now, we have bigger problems. Garcia, what do you know about Draco's bioweapon?" The grizzled veteran's expression darkened. "Bad business, that. My people have been tracking shipments to a fortified base in the Cygnus sector. If he gets that stuff weaponized—" Hall nodded grimly. "Agreed. We need to take it out before it's too late." He turned to Corv. "Contact Rolus. Tell him to prepare for a full-scale assault on Draco's stronghold." As Corv bustled off, Hall faced Garcia. "I need your help. Your intelligence, your resources. Everything you can spare." Garcia studied him for a long moment before nodding. "All right, Captain, but I'm coming with you. Someone's got to keep an eye on things." Over the next days, Hall threw himself into planning the offensive. He coordinated with Rolus's forces, pored over intelligence reports, and assembled a crack infiltration team led by Vela. As the deadline approached, Hall addressed his troops from the bridge of the flagship Defiant. "This is it," he said, his voice carrying across comm channels. "Draco's bioweapon represents an existential threat to every living being in this galaxy. We cannot allow it to be unleashed." The fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Draco's stronghold. Rolus's ships immediately opened fire, their barrage shattering planetary defenses and pounding the surface. "Vela, you're clear to launch," Hall ordered. "May the stars guide you." He watched as the infiltration shuttle streaked towards the planet's surface, dodging debris and sporadic bursts of anti-aircraft fire. Hours crawled by as Hall coordinated the assault, dispatching reinforcements and adjusting strategy on the fly. Finally, Vela's voice crackled over the comm. "We're in," she reported. "Proceeding to the lab complex now." Hall allowed himself a moment of hope. If they could secure those samples, deal a decisive blow to Draco's plans. Suddenly, alarms blared. "Sir," a sensor officer called out, "multiple signatures dropping out of hyperspace." Hall's blood ran cold as he saw the tactical display. A massive Krenim fleet, led by a dagger-shaped vessel he didn't recognize. "Vela, get out of there now," he shouted into the comm. "It's a trap." But it was too late. As Rolus's ships engaged the new threat, Hall could only watch helplessly as Vela's signal vanished amidst the chaos. In the aftermath of the disastrous assault, Hall found himself at a crossroads. Vela was gone, Malra's rebellion grew stronger by the day, and now evidence suggested the former counselors were pulling strings from their prison cells. As he prepared for the emergency summit on Haven Prime, Hall knew the hope of the universe hung in the balance. He only hoped it wasn't already too late to salvage what remained of his dream for a united future. The emergency summit on Haven Prime erupted into chaos as blaster fire tore through the assembly hall. Hall dove behind an overturned table, his ears ringing from the deafening cacophony of screams and explosions. "Counselors!" he shouted into his comm unit. "Report status." Static crackled, then Korv's panicked voice came through. "Eastern corridors compromised. They're everywhere." A shadow fell across Hall. He looked up to see Garcia, face grim, offering a hand. "Time to go, Captain. This shindig's over." They sprinted through smoke-filled corridors, dodging falling debris and pockets of fierce fighting. As they neared the hangar bay, a familiar figure stumbled into view, Rolus, clutching a bleeding arm. "The counselors," the general gasped. "They've escaped. It was all a diversion." Hall's stomach dropped. He'd underestimated their opponents, and now everything was unraveling. Days later, aboard the Defiant, Hall stared at tactical displays showing a galaxy in flames. Ralthak's forces had seized key systems, emboldened by the chaos. Reports flooded in of Krenim loyalists rallying to Vortex's banner. Garcia strode onto the bridge, datapad in hand. "Got something, Captain. My people tracked the counselors to Kalganor. It's a fortress, but it might be our only shot," Hall finished. He turned to Rolus. "General, assemble the fleet. We end this now." As ships mustered for the assault, Vela approached Hall. "Sir, request permission to lead the infiltration team." Hall studied her face, saw the commitment there. He nodded. "Granted, but be careful in there." The space above Kalganor erupted into a maelstrom of weapons fire as Rolus's fleet engaged the orbital defenses. Hall watched from the Defiance bridge as Vela's stealth shuttle slipped past the chaos, descending towards the planet's surface. Hours crawled by. Suddenly, Vela's voice crackled over the comm. "Targets confirmed. Moving to—" Her words cut off in a burst of static. "Vela!" Hall shouted. "Come in!" Silence stretched on, broken only by the sounds of battle. Hall's fists clenched at his sides. He turned to Rolus, who shook his head. "We can't risk it, Captain. The assault's working. We pull back now. We lose everything." Hall's mind focused. He stared at the tactical display, at the blinking dot representing Vela's last known position. He made his decision. "Prepare a strike team," he ordered. "I'm going in." The insertion was a nightmare of fire and shrapnel. Hall's shuttle barely touched down before taking a direct hit. He stumbled from the wreckage, ears ringing, to find Garcia at his side. "Thought you could use some backup," the grizzled veteran shouted over the din. They fought their way through Kalganor's crumbling defenses, racing against time. In the central bunker, they found Vela, battered but alive, locked in combat with Vortex. The Krenim counselor's eyes glowed with unholy power as he unleashed a psionic assault. Hall raised his blaster, but a new threat emerged. Draco, the Wagnir renegade, stepped from the shadows. In his hands, he held a canister pulsing with sickly green light. "Did you really think it would be so easy?" Draco sneered. The canister hissed open, releasing a cloud of writhing nanites. Hall's world exploded into agony as the bioweapon tore through his defenses. Through blurred vision, he saw Garcia and Vela collapsing, saw Draco advancing. A thunderous explosion rocked the bunker. New voices filled the air, the sounds of fresh combat. Hall felt strong arms lifting him, dragging him to safety. As consciousness faded, he glimpsed a familiar face. Malra, her expression unreadable. "Rest now, Captain," she said softly. "The real war is just beginning." Darkness claimed him, leaving only questions and the certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Hall's eyes snapped open, the sterile white of a medbay ceiling coming into focus. His body ached, every nerve screaming from the bioweapons assault. As his vision cleared, he saw Malra standing at the foot of his bed, her expression unreadable. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Captain," she said, her voice tinged with a mixture of relief and something darker. "You've been out for days." Hall tried to speak, but his throat was raw. Malra offered him water, which he accepted cautiously. "Why?" he managed to croak. Malra's eyes hardened. "Because the galaxy needs you, even if it doesn't know it yet." Before Hall could press further, the door slid open. General Rolas strode in, his uniform immaculate despite the chaos Hall remembered from Kalganor. "Captain," Rolas nodded curtly, "we have a situation." Over the next hour, Hall listened in growing horror as Rolas outlined the deteriorating state of the galaxy. The Kalganor strike's failure had shattered what remained of the old order. Draco's bioweapons were wreaking havoc on human outposts, while Vortex's Krenim faction had all but declared open war. "We need decisive action," Rolas concluded, his eyes gleaming with a fervor that sent a chill down Hall's spine. "I've proposed implementing martial law and deploying the Purge Legions to root out this cancer once and for all." Hall's mind reeled. The cure Rolas proposed seemed as dangerous as the disease, but as reports flooded in of further attacks and growing unrest, he found himself nodding reluctantly. "Do what you must, General," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "But remember why we fought for this alliance in the first place." Rolas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Captain. We'll bring peace back to the galaxy, whatever it takes." As the general left, Hall turned to Malra. "And where do you stand in all this?" Her lips curved in a bitter smile. "Oh, I have my own plans, Captain. You'll see soon enough." Days blurred into weeks as Hall struggled to regain his strength. He watched helplessly as Rolas's iron fist tightened its grip on the galaxy. The Purge Legions struck with ruthless efficiency, leaving devastation in their wake. Reports trickled in of a growing resistance movement led by Garcia and Vela. Hall felt a glimmer of hope, quickly extinguished by news of their increasingly desperate tactics. Then came the day that shattered what remained of Hall's world. Corv, loyal to the end, had uncovered evidence of Assembly members collaborating with the escaped counselors. Before he could present his findings, Rolas's agents struck. Hall stood before Corv's shrouded body, his fists clenched at his sides. Rolas approached, his face a mask of false sympathy. "A tragic loss," the general said smoothly. "But we must press on. The threat grows by the day." Hall met Rolas's gaze, seeing the ruthless ambition barely concealed beneath. He knew then that his dream of a united, peaceful galaxy was truly dead. "You're right," Hall said, his voice hollow. "We end this, now." As they left the morgue, neither man noticed the small drone hovering in the shadows, its camera capturing every moment of their exchange. In a hidden base light years away, Vela watched the footage, her heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. "It's worse than we thought," she said to Garcia, who stood grim-faced beside her. "We're out of options." Garcia nodded, his scarred face set in willpower. "Then we do what we must, even if it means becoming the very thing we once fought against." As they began planning their audacious attempt, the galaxy hurtled towards a confrontation that would leave no one unscathed.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.